name is Derek M. Cook. My journey continues. A journey that I hope will introduce you to many, many more monster movies for several years to come. This journey, I can't do any more of this. This is Derek M. Cook. This is Monster Kid Radio, the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is episode 531, and we are talking about Dark Shadows this time around. I have got Penny Dreadful, aka Danielle Gelehrter, here on the show to talk about her new podcast, The Terror at Collinwood. And I'm really excited because, one, I've not really had her on the show proper. Yeah, she was on a Monster Bash episode a few years back, but to actually spend a whole bunch of time with her talking about Dark Shadows and a handful of other things, that was just a treat. And two, it's Dark freaking Shadows. Dark Shadows is awesome. I love me some Dark Shadows. She loves Dark Shadows even more, and I cannot wait to share the conversation that I had with her with you. Of course, this would not be an episode of Monster Kid Radio without a couple of segments. Kenny brings back a classic look at famous monsters of Filmland, and Mark Matzke has another beta capsule review covering an episode of Ultraman, episode 15 this time around. He's been going through every single episode of that Ultra series and Ultra Q before it, and it's just been amazing. And hey, did you guys and gals see that Mill Creek Entertainment has announced that they've got plans to release even more Ultraman series through the end of the year? Hello, Amazon wishlist. Make some Ultra room. I'm just saying. I'm really excited about it. And, you know, they announced this on Ultraman Day, which was just a couple of days ago. I hope you celebrated Ultraman Day, and Mark in particular, I hope you celebrated Ultraman Day by at least watching one episode of Ultraman or reading something Ultraman related. I know there's a new comic book series from Marvel Comics. You could have read a comic. I just hope you did. I hope everybody did something Ultraman related. Of course, as always, next year and the year after that, you know, future Ultraman days. Or make Ultraman Day today when you hear his beta capsule review. I'm going to go ahead and do some of the stuff that I normally do at the end of the show right here. First of all, big thanks to the band that's letting us play their music here on the show. It's Los Dedos, and this is the song The Bat. It's from their EP release, Los Dedos, which came out earlier this year in March. There's 5 songs on this EP release. Each one of them's pretty cool. I like The Bat in particular, and not just because they just released a music video for it, featuring footage from the classic film The Bat. In fact, I'm going to be able to show that music video during this upcoming Saturday's Monster Kid Movie Club. So you don't want to miss that. The Monster Kid Movie Club is something that we do every Saturday, and this Saturday we're showing a bunch of Mad Scientist movies. It happens on Twitch, so you go to twitch.tv/monsterkidradio or monsterkidmovie.club on Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific. That's when the pre-show starts, and at noon the movies start, and it goes till at least 8 o'clock that evening. We're going to be showing some awesome movies. I'm really looking forward to it. Scott Morris does the pre-show. He always does on Bang Up, Knocked. He does a really good job. And I'm really excited for that too. So come and join us for one movie or for all of them, and keep your eyes open online, because on Facebook and on Twitter I announce the schedule usually the day before, so you'll know what movies to expect to find there. This upcoming Tuesday is the Monster Kid Astronomy Club at the same place. Normally we show science fiction movies. Lately we've been doing a lot of film serials. Well, this time around we're going to be doing 2 silent films starring Harry Houdini. You don't want to miss that either. And again, I usually post a schedule for that, usually the day before. So keep your eyes open and join us for that. This, of course, will all be on our website at monsterkidradio.net, where you're going to find all of our links to Facebook and Twitter and Discord and Reddit. And you're going to find our contact information.
You can call and leave a voicemail for Monster Kid Radio at 503-810-5MKR. That's 503-810-5657.
Or you can send an email to the podcast. monsterkidradio@gmail.com is the email address. That's monsterkidradio@gmail.com.
You'll also find links to everything that we talk about here on the show. I'll make sure there are links to a number of Dark Shadows products in our website. So if you want to pick up anything Dark Shadows, please consider using one of those links because we are an Amazon affiliate. And while it doesn't cost you anything extra, it does take a penny or two out of the going to outer space pockets of Jeff Bezos and put some into the Monster Kid Radio coffers. And believe me, every little bit helps. Okay, let's go ahead and get into this episode. We've got Kenny, we've got Mark, we've got Penny, we've got Dark Shadows, and we have a host that needs to stop flapping his gums so we can get to the rest of the show.
Dracula has risen from the grave.
Boy, does he give a hickey.
The Mummy. Fear will freeze you when you face it. The Mummy. Torn from the darkest tomb of the pharaohs, it rises from the quiet dust of centuries to wreak a strange vengeance against mankind. The Mummy. It tears steel bars like paper. It snaps men's spines like matchsticks. It walks through bullets like a ghost. The Mummy. It sees without eyes. It lives without breath. Yet its desires are strangely, madly human.
The motion picture screen's most shocking experience in suspense.
In chilling Technicolor. The Mummy.
3 animated TV series, 3 animated feature films, over 50 years of stories, over 150 characters, 10 core comic book titles, 27 spin-off comic book titles, nearly 30 limited series spin-offs, and of course, 4 feature films. Well, okay, 5 if you count Captain America Civil War, or maybe it's like 4.5. The Avengers are a Marvel Comics mainstay, and no matter how many films crush it at the box office, or how many more Avengers spin-off titles come out, it all comes back to that original comic series that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby thrust upon the world in 1963. And I'm going to read the entire run. My name is Derek M. Cook, and I'm a recovering comic book fan. Over on my YouTube channel, Comicstalgia, you can join me as I make my way through the comic with my Reading the Avengers YouTube series. Every episode, I'll take a look at an issue of the comic, share my thoughts about the story, its artwork and characters, and reflect on how the issue may have impacted or inspired other facets and corners of all things Marvel. I'd like to invite you to join me as I make my way through every single issue of this iconic comic book. Assemble with me at tinyurl.com/readingtheavengers, or look up Comicstalgia on YouTube where you can find all the previous episodes and even subscribe to make sure you don't miss anything while we're reading the Avengers. That's tinyurl.com/readingtheavengers. Nuff said.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Terrifying cosmic rays are at work in the 15th episode of Ultraman, causing the drawings of a child to come to life. At first, a schoolboy named Mushiba is teased because the monster he drew looked like a tadpole. The razzing continues as he sketches the monster on a pipe, but when the aforementioned cosmic rays strike the artwork, the kaiju comes to life, producing Gavadon, who waddles about, attracting the attention of the Science Patrol before falling asleep. When the sun goes down, Gavadon disappears. Mushiba's status is on the rise, and his newly friendly classmates collaborate with him in drawing a bigger, better Gavadon. The next day, Gavadon, now far more colorful and intimidating looking, makes a brief rampage but once again falls asleep in the middle of the city, bringing the local economy to a screeching halt. After sundown, the children visit their revised drawing and urge their monster to try a little harder to be menacing. Meanwhile, the SSSP and the military prepare for direct confrontation with the creature, But when Ultraman arrives on the scene, he finds himself in uncharted territory, regarded as a villain by the children who created Gavadan. Terrifying Cosmic Rays is an utterly fascinating entry in the Ultraman series, as it explores the affection children have towards giant monsters and the creative drive they inspire. From the meta beginning with school kid artwork of Ultra Monsters to the stunning final scene, the episode suggests that children not only love to draw kaiju, they also simply love kaiju. That puts Ultraman in an awkward spot, and you'll notice our hero does not kill Gavadan, but instead transports him to the stars. This 15th entry in the series, written and directed by the same team responsible for last week's Pearl Defense Directive, displays a deep and almost uncanny understanding of their target audience, kids who identify with monsters. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Godzilla, king of the monsters, alive, surging up from the depths of the sea on a tidal wave of terror to wreak vengeance on mankind.
Godzilla, king of the monsters, it's alive!
A gigantic beast,
Stalking the earth, crushing all before it.
in a cyclonic cavalcade of electrifying horror.
Raging through the streets on a rampage of total destruction.
Godzilla, king of the monsters,
Incredible titan of terror.
wiping out a city of 6 million in a holocaust of flame.
Jet flames cannot destroy it.
Bombs cannot kill it.
All modern weapons fail.
Is this the end of our civilization?
Can the scientists of the world find a way to stop this creature?
For the answer, see Godzilla, king of the monsters.
You may wish to deny it, but your eyes tell you it's true.
A tale to stun the mind.
More fantastic than any ever written by Jules Verne.
More terrifying than any ever shown on the screen.
Awesome.
Incredible.
Unbelievable.
A story beyond your wildest dreams.
Dynamic violence.
Savage action.
Spectacular thrills.
Godzilla, king of the monsters.
Fantastic beyond comprehension.
Gripping beyond compare.
Astounding beyond belief.
The mightiest monster of them all.
See Godzilla, king of the monsters.
Please, we're doing all we can for you. We're trying to bring you back down to normal size.
You do think I'm a freak, don't you? But you know, to me, you're the freak, the one who's different. I'm not growing, you're shrinking.
He started as a normal human being, but now each day he doubles in size. Where will it stop? The amazing colossal man.
Colonel, he's been reported in Las Vegas. Impossible. How can he walk 120 miles in only an hour?
Impossible. Not when you're 60 feet tall. The amazing colossal man.
Twins of evil, the most fearsome females in horror history.
One uses her beauty for love.
One uses her lure for blood.
Twins of evil, rated R.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at famous monsters of Filmland. Today, Derek and Penny Dreadful are looking at Dark Shadows. I have dragged a 3-year-old segment out of the crypt to remind our old listeners and inform our new ones of how this classic TV series was covered in FM. Here we go. This classic program was featured in Famous Monsters 52 from October of 1968. The fang-bearing Jonathan Frid as Barnabas Collins is on the cover, which also mentions articles on Dr. Cyclops and Planet of the Apes. Inside, we find an 8-page article about the show, which includes 10 photos. The article begins with this introduction. His parents christened him Barnabas Collins. Nothing unusual about that, except it took place 175 years ago. Grown to manhood, one dark night in Barnabas' life, he became unchristened. The night he took on an unholy new kind of pseudo-life, a living death. the night he became a vampire. But Barnabas is such a human vampire that his vast television public has great sympathy for him. His gentility has endeared him to the hearts and hemoglobin of millions of mesmerized TV watchers who can't live without their daily dose of dark shadows. The article continues with a history of the show's development and then talks about the star Jonathan Frid, who had this to say about his role. When I leave the studio, I go home and work 2 or 3 hours on the script. I have no social life at all. I must get up at 6:30 or 7 and work for an hour over breakfast before going to the studio. At the studio, I work on the script all day long when I'm not rehearsing. I play Barnabas as a lonely man with a conscience, Frid continued. He's a guilt-ridden monster because of his need for blood, but he is also a sympathetic human who yearns to be a normal man. My character is unpredictable. I'll go along for a while being very quiet and tragic. Then suddenly I'll lunge as the lust for blood overwhelms me. The fantastic fan reaction to the Barnabas character is then described, as well as a celebration of his first anniversary, which was April 14th, 1967. For some strange, unknown reason, the article concludes with silly vampire riddles like this one. What happens when you cross a vampire with a hippopotamus? You get a hippopotamus that casts no reflection in a mirror. Dark Shadows is featured 7 issues later in November of 1969 in issue 59. Barnabas again graces the cover, this time in the form of a beautiful medium-shot portrait painted by Basil Gogos. Inside, we find a 7-page article with 9 photos from the show. The article was taken from an in-depth interview with Jonathan Frid about his acting career. In this section, he compares Barnabas to the Bela Lugosi portrayal of Dracula. I play Barnabas as a being with human emotions. I'm not copying Lugosi because, in fact, I didn't know much about his characterization of the vampire until I caught the Dracula movie on the Late Movie recently. I'll admit I was fascinated by Lugosi. His performance was like a ballet, yet his vampire was a bloodless, evil, passionless monster. With the white face and full red lips, he gave the appearance of death. I never took that tact. The Dark Shadows writers gave full life to Barnabas. He was a human being, more like Mr. Hyde with a lust for blood. Lugosi played his character in a monotone, no range, no warmth, just a cold-blooded vampire, which actually is more legitimate in keeping with the legends. I suppose women see Barnabas as a romantic figure because I portray him as a lonely, tormented man who bites girls in the neck, but only when my uncontrollable need for blood drives me to it, and I always feel remorseful about it later. He has a nasty problem. He craves blood. Afterwards, like an alcoholic or addict, he is ashamed but simply cannot control himself. Remember, too, Lugosi's Dracula wasn't particular about where the blood came from. Renfield was a male among his early victims. Barnabas is partial to women, which makes him again a more romantic character. The article finishes with a closer look at Frid's influences and career. This Dark Shadows article shares FM 59 with looks at the classic Hammer films Dracula Has Risen from the Grave and Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and interviews with John Carradine and Carol Borland. I want to sneak in my own Dark Shadows memories here. I was 4 to 5 years old when my mother watched Dark Shadows faithfully along with General Hospital and Another World. I vaguely remember seeing bits and pieces. One vivid memory I do have was of the storyline that involved a disembodied hand. It apparently frightened me greatly, so much that I think I was not allowed to watch anymore. My older brother took advantage of that and cut the hand off of my Raggedy Andy doll and tried to set up a Rube Goldberg device that would have the hand float down on me on a wire when I opened the door to our room. It didn't work, but I was quite upset about my doll being cut up. I have not returned to Dark Shadows. I struggle with the production values, but I hope to catch a few to see if I can get into the Dark Shadows spirit. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next week. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
It could be true, you know. There could actually be a man named Barnabas Collins, and he could actually be a real vampire. House of Dark Shadows from MGM. See how the vampires do it.
Rated GP, all ages, parental guidance.
It all begins as a summer vacation. A young family finds a beautiful old house. It could be the answer to their dreams.
So you are the people who want to rent this house?
Well, you mean it's $900 and then it's all ours?
Or the beginning of a nightmare. Burnt Offerings, starring Karen Black,
Are you actually trying to tell me that this house is responsible?
Oliver Reed,
This house is destroying us.
Betty Davis,
This house is getting so cold.
Burgess Meredith,
This house will be here long, long after you have departed, you believe me?
Eileen Heckert,
When it comes alive, tell them what it's like.
Burnt Offerings, from United Artists. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
Vampires, werewolves, zombies.
Yes, these things are real, but fortunately for those of us who can afford him, so is Mark Temple.
And he's good. Real good. He's a former FBI agent turned freelancer with the knowledge and skills to eliminate your monster problems. And his rates are negotiable.
Monster Hunter for Hire, the first volume of the Supernatural Solutions, the Mark Temple Case Files, is now available in both ebook and paperback. Go to tinyurl.com/monsterhuntertemple to buy your copy of Derek M. Cook's latest book.
Read about Mark Temple, the experienced professional now available to rid you of your supernatural, ghoulish, and monstrous pests.
That's tinyurl.com/monsterhuntertemple.
And don't worry, Mark Temple is discreet.
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Monster Kid Radio listeners, you may know her as a horror host. You might even know her as somebody who pops up in the occasional He-Man documentary. But these days, I hope you know her as a Dark Shadows aficionado and podcaster. It's Danielle Gelehrter here on the show talking about Dark Shadows, and I want to catch up with her because I haven't really had a chance to talk to her in a long time. But welcome to the show.
Derek, hi. Oh my God. It's such a pleasure to be here and to talk with you, to geek out with you, which I've been like fantasizing about for years. I want to geek out with Derek M. Cook, the Rondo Award winning Derek M. Cook, who I want to geek out with. Awesome.
Oh, man. And I apologize. I did just use your civilian name. Is that okay?
Oh, yes. Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. That's fine. Danielle and Penny Dreadful, you know, they finally have come to an understanding. They've kind of merged into one being. It's all good.
Oh, good. Well, I've been excited to have you on the show too. I mean, I've been really excited about the podcast that you've launched. And, you know, I love my Dark Shadows. I think you've got a deeper, longer lasting love of Dark Shadows than me, but man, I get to geek out with you about Dark Shadows. So I'm super excited about this too.
Awesome. Oh, I can't wait. I'm so psyched. Yeah. Dark Shadows. It's like obsessive about Dark Shadows.
It's easy to do. I mean, there's such a deep, I don't know, do you want to call it lore? You could really get lost in all things Dark Shadows real easy. I mean, over 1,000 episodes to explore, and they did a lot with that. It wasn't just a dark, spooky soap opera. They did so much more with this show that I think once you start watching, you're going to be impressed with, you know, the different timelines and all the different monsters and lore that they are able to weave into their own storyline and make something completely unique. And that music is haunting, and the performances are so good.
Indeed. Yeah, it's and so influential too in a lot of ways. I think a lot of times, with the modern shows, Dark Shadows doesn't really get as much credit as it deserves in terms of how it influenced like serialized storytelling and horror television, things like Supernatural and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Vampire Diaries and things like that all owe a debt to Dark Shadows, and in particular vampires, the sort of sympathetic vampire like you see in True Blood and things like that, or especially like Anne Rice with Interview with a Vampire and things like that, where you get that sort of Barnabas influence in those vampires is very clear.
Sure. I've talked to some people who are also fans of Dark Shadows, and they will credit Dan Curtis as bringing in like the sympathetic romantic Dracula type with the Dracula TV movie that he did with Jack Palance. But I still feel like you go back further and you see it clearly with Barnabas.
Yeah.
The romance, the tortured romance, the time spanning love element gets worked into that storyline, and so effortlessly too. It works so well.
Yeah, definitely. I think Barnabas really was, I think it was Mark DeWidziak said that Barnabas was the sort of the bridge between the full-on predator vampire and the more sort of tortured vampire, because Barnabas kind of embodied both of those elements. He could be very unpredictable and dangerous, but he could also have that tortured sadness and longing, and Frid, Jonathan Frid, really just, he catapulted that sort of idea of that type of vampire into pop culture. I mean, we had predecessors like Gloria Holden and Dracula's Daughter, right? Countess Zaleska and Varney the Vampire and the Penny Dreadfuls and stuff, who you could argue are also sympathetic vampires. But I think in terms of like a full-on, fully explored vampire like Barnabas, where you get his backstory, even like the secret origin of Barnabas with the 1795 storyline. I believe that was a first. Like, I don't ever remember having a sustained backstory presented for a vampire before. Do you? Like, I'm trying to think back to like earlier films and stuff, and I can't think of one where you really get that.
I'm sure somebody listening right now is shaking their fist, mentioning some obscure movie or novel or something that I just can't think of off the top of my head. But I really do feel like,
yeah,
I'm with you. Barnabas really, if he wasn't the first, he's the first to popularize this tragic romantic backstory of loss, but still melding it to this wicked. I mean, Barnabas was no joke. The first time I watched Dark Shadows, which I came to relatively late, as a monster kid, I was terrified every time he was on screen with a character. The first time he met Willie, the first time he met Carolyn, I was terrified for those characters because I didn't trust Barnabas. I was like, he's a vampire, and you could see that simmering beneath the surface.
Yeah.
David? I was super terrified for David the first time they met. It's like, oh my God, no,
Yeah.
And David was kind of a brat.
Yeah.
So I don't know how broken up I really would have been about it, but
he was a brat. And then before he was a brat in the pre-Barnabas episodes, like literally a child psychopath where he's trying to kill Vicky and lock her in the West Wing of Collinwood, but yeah, totally. If Barnabas had that simmering sort of that unpredictability, like you don't know. Somebody posted online years ago, they were doing like an analysis of Barnabas, and they said Barnabas was always, no matter how tortured Barnabas was or how much of an anti-hero he eventually became, he was still always judge, jury, and executioner. Like Barnabas decided who lived and who died when he was a vampire. Like he just, even when he wasn't a vampire, sometimes he would get kind of dark like that. But he was also like tortured, like the sense of loss and longing. And it was that mix that made the character so compelling, I think, to watch, and to see how that unfolded. I think with Varney the Vampire, you did see some of that. There was a little bit of how he became a vampire, but I don't think they really fully explored that. And of course, Dark Shadows, I think as Jeff Thompson said, like Dark Shadows was a big deal in the 60s, and everybody was watching it, especially going into 69, 68, 69. It was in so many living rooms and kids watching it at the height of the monster craze, right? When the Aurora models were at their height and the shock theater package and all this was going on. Dark Shadows just hit at the right place at the right time. And of course, Dan Curtis himself, who I think should be in the Monster Kid Hall of Fame. By the way, I'm going to start pushing for this. I think Dan
Is
Curtis,
he not?
I don't think he is. And he was a monster kid. Like, he loved all of that stuff. Like, he loved the Universal films and Turn of the Screw and Jekyll and Hyde. He was a big fan of that stuff growing up. I think he started to downplay it a little bit when I think he got pigeonholed into horror, but he did so much horror stuff. But then he did Winds of War and War and Remembrance, so I think he broke out of that kind of mold, but he'll always be remembered for his horror work. And he was a monster kid, and I really think he should be in the Monster Kid Hall of Fame. I don't think he is. I'm pretty sure he isn't.
I just pulled up the list of the Monster Kid Hall of Fame inductees over the years, and I'm not seeing his name on here. So yeah, we definitely need to push for that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Dan Sember. If you do Dan Sember, it's got to be Monster Kid Hall of Fame. Dan Curtis.
There you go. Yeah, and he. You can definitely tell when you watch Dark Shadows that it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to make a spooky show. He was in it. He knew his stuff and he loved it. You go and you watch his Dracula or his Frankenstein or his Jekyll and Hyde. You could tell he wasn't just, glomming on to something that was popular. He really had a love for this stuff. And there was that documentary that came out, 2 years ago now at this point?
Yeah.
You could really learn a little bit more about his background too. And just, he's somebody that I wish I would have had an opportunity to meet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. He didn't do any conventions or anything like that, which is a shame. I know he did that television award thing that, the Museum of Film and Television History. He got, Dark Shadows was inducted into that, and he did that event. But he rarely did any kind of cons or anything like that. But it would have been really cool to meet him. I hear he was a very intimidating presence, big, loud, and larger than life kind of a person, but with kind of a good heart, but very scary almost because of how intense he was.
Yeah, and I could totally see that, just kind of based on some of the interviews that I've seen with him and some of the things that I've read about him over the years, for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still wanted just to sit down and pick his brain for just gently, of course. Pick his brain for a few minutes would have been amazing. Fortunately, he left us a lot of amazing television and cinema to really get into. And I want to talk a little bit more about your history with Dark Shadows and why you decided to start a podcast. But we got to do something first.
Uh-oh. Dare I ask? I think I know what it is.
Oh, yeah. We got to play a round of the Classic Five.
Yay.
The Classic Five.
So for listeners who don't know, the Classic Five is a card game that we play here on the show. I've got a literal deck of cards here. We're going to draw 5 cards here, and each one of these cards has a this or that, which movie do you prefer style question. It's not a trivia game. There are no wrong answers. It's just a way to get a couple of monster kids talking. And I'm going to bust out some questions that were submitted by friend of the show, Scott Morris. He ran these by the Monster Kid Movie Club last weekend. I wasn't here for that. I actually had to run an errand when it was happening, but I love the cards so much, the questions so much. I want to run them by you. Are you ready to play a round of the Classic Five?
I am.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. Frankenstein had Frankenberry. Dracula had Count Chocula, and there's Blueberry, of course. What would the Creature from the Black Lagoon's cereal taste like?
Ooh, what would it taste like?
Yeah.
I think it would taste like lime because it would be green, right? I think it would have to be green, so it would be like lime flavored cereal with maybe what complements lime, maybe like lemon marshmallows or something,
Ooh.
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Yeah. I want to have some.
Yeah, I haven't had a good cereal in a long time, so that'd be good. That'd be great. All right.
I think Van Helsing should have a cereal called Vanilla Helsing, and he can be Count Chocula's enemy.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, I love that. Somebody needs to mock that box up and submit that to those folks.
My friend Tom did it. I asked him to do it.
Oh,
I'll
really?
send you the picture. It's great. It's great.
That's awesome. Awesome. All right. Question number 2. What classic monster would you like to see Alfred Hitchcock direct a movie about?
Ooh. Oh, wow. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Oh, yeah.
I really would love to see that. I think it would be really moody and suspenseful. A Hitchcock Jekyll and Hyde. It'd just be really cool, I think.
Wow. Oh, wow. That just sounds amazing. All right. So he normally played a human character or a monster hunter, but if you had an opportunity to see Peter Cushing play a monster, what monster would you like to see him play?
Ooh. Oh, wow. Oh, what monster would I like to see him play? I think I would like to see him play a vampire. He's more known as a vampire hunter, but I think I would like to see him play a vampire because he's certainly has that refined aristocratic air, and he can be very cold, so I think he would be an interesting vampire.
I immediately went to Twins of Evil when you said that in terms of like the characterization. That would be a wicked vampire.
Yes. Yeah. I think he would. I mean, he'd be great in any role he plays.
Yeah. He was.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
All right. So who wins in a fight question. Who wins in a fight? Godzilla or the amazing colossal man?
Godzilla.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. I think Godzilla.
No hesitation.
No, Godzilla. No, he's like, come on. He's claws and teeth and the atomic breath. I mean, come on.
Fair enough. Actually, that's kind of where I would go to.
Yeah.
But,
Tail. Just swing that tail and just knock him off. No, come on. No.
It's Godzilla. He's a force of nature.
Yeah,
you can't,
I mean, not taking anything away from the amazing colossal man, but come on, it's Godzilla. King of the monsters.
Yeah. All right, final question. What classic monster movie character would you like to have seen turn up in a different monster movie?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would like to see... I think I would have liked to have seen the Bride of Frankenstein show up in one of the Universal sequels, maybe House of Frankenstein or House of Dracula, because the Bride only gets that one little appearance at the end of Bride of Frankenstein, and she's such an iconic monster, but she gets such little screen time. I really would have liked to have seen more of Elsa Lanchester as the Bride in other films.
Her performance, the way she has very little to say. I mean, she screams a few times, but her nonverbal communication is just the way she kind of jerks her head around. And I know she kind of based some of that on, it was a bird of some sort, wasn't it?
Yeah, a swan. Yeah, and the hissing and
And it's so iconic and lasts less than 5 minutes on screen.
Yeah.
It would have been, I mean, that would have been amazing to see in other, oh man. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I wish we could have gotten more of her,
Yeah. So for me, I would want to see one of the big three, either Dracula the monster or the Wolfman, have some sort of connection to the creature films.
Yeah.
Or because I've got this kind of fan theory that I've been kind of massaging over the years with the Universal monster movies. Since Bride of Frankenstein starts with Mary Shelley telling the people their story, well, the story didn't end there. It continues with this, and then she goes on and tells the Bride of Frankenstein story. So in my head, and maybe this is just becoming a huge nerd, listeners are like, I'm a huge nerd. In my head, I'm saying, I'm trying to develop this theory that since Mary Shelley created the Bride of Frankenstein story, she clearly created the first story as well. And since those stories continued, Son of Frankenstein goes to Frankenstein or whatever, well, who's to say that those stories weren't stories that Mary Shelley also, whatever. And since they cross over with Dracula and they cross over with the Wolfman, now I've got this weird fan theory where Mary Shelley is basically the mother of the Universal monster stories.
Oh, awesome.
Connecting this weird kind of continuity. And I've been trying real hard to figure out how to work Creature and Mummy into that mix.
I think I know Creature was in the Abbott and Costello TV show. Didn't they have, they had like a scene with the creature. And I guess that's the closest we came to sort of like the Universal including the creature as part of the gang there. And the Mummy, too, that's because it's sold like kind of its own thing, but you can find a way.
But I'm trying to figure it out. I'm going to make it work. I'm kind of stuck right now. I just saw Creature a weekend or so ago here at the Joy Cinema, and there was a scene that stood out to me this time more so than normal, and it's towards the end where Richard Carlson's in the cave and the bat comes swinging down at him. Just randomly, there's a bat.
Yeah.
So now my brain's like, well, what if that's Dracula kind of scoping things out? I don't know. I don't know. It's a stretch.
Well,
I know.
when you say Monster Squad is kind of unofficially part.
Yeah.
Because we could include Monster Squad, right? Would that work?
Yeah. There you go.
There you go.
There
Then
you
he's
go.
there. Well, it's kind of their alternate universe version. We were actually messaging about the creature the other day because I
Right?
wanted to pick your brain about him because I'm like, where does the creature fit in with the Universal monsters? Because the rest of them are either cursed or supernatural beings, right? Or made by mad science, but the creature seems very distinct in that. Like, I always thought of him as a cryptid. I mentioned that to a friend of mine a while back, and I just put my theory out, and I got a lot of pushback on that. I'm like, but he kind of is. I guess,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever really verbalized it or kind of put the words to it, but I think you're right. He's the abominable snowman or Bigfoot of the Amazon. He's just this cryptid, yeah.
But he's sentient in a way, like kind of like Bigfoot, I guess. Like, he has that higher intelligence. I mean, he's a humanoid creature, but he's like a lost prehistoric creature from the past that would somehow survived into the present day in this isolated lagoon. So that's kind of a cryptid, you know. But then you have things like Guillermo del Toro did the Shape of Water. His version of a gill man was more something more mystical, or like a worshipped as a god and this being from folklore. But the Universal creature never seemed to exhibit any kind of supernatural abilities or anything like that, as far as I recall. So
I mean, he was strong,
yeah,
but he wasn't supernaturally strong. I mean, I totally believe that.
Right,
you know?
right.
It wasn't.
Right.
Well, and I think I mentioned in the conversation we were having too, that if you go back to the Monster Squad again, it's unofficial or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, Dracula's got the wooden stakes and, you know, all the mystical stuff with the Wolfman. Gilman's taken out with a shotgun.
Yeah.
And it's so disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah. They should have at least used a harpoon or something.
Oh, that would have been perfect.
You know, like yeah, definitely. Like, just have that callback. Like, they could have done that. But yeah, I don't know. I also posited on the classic horror film board years ago. I posited the theory that what if he's actually tied to the deep ones, Lovecraft's deep ones from the Shadow over Innsmouth. That got some definite pushback too. People were like, no, it's not Lovecraft. I was like, I know, I'm sure Universal was probably not reading Lovecraft. People at Universal,
not even on their radar.
Probably not. But it just seemed like, it was like, well, maybe that's a thing. Like, you know, just fan theories. You know, like, I don't think he is. I'm not partial to that theory, but it was just, I just kind of put it out there to see what people thought.
Yeah, and I've heard people bring up the Lovecraft connection with Creature again, which may be part of the reason why I love the Creature so much, because I'm a huge fan of the writing of Lovecraft.
Yeah,
so,
definitely, definitely. Oh man, that's wonderful stuff. Yeah, Shadow over Innsmouth is just so good. Yeah, and all of that. Call of Cthulhu and, oh my God, Dunwich Horror, which was in Dark Shadows. That's another one. Dan Curtis came in with Dunwich Horror. It was like, let's do this, you know? It's like,
yeah, I was about to say, you know, what if Dan Curtis had done some Lovecraft? But there was some Lovecraft in there.
Yeah, the Leviathans, which I think gets a lot of flack from fans, but I kind of dig the Leviathans because it's just such a crazy pivot from coming out of the 1897 storyline, the much beloved 1897 storyline, which is deservedly so, a wonderful storyline. But then you go to Leviathans, which is the most really bizarre kind of turn of events that they introduce into the show. And that's the thing with Dark Shadows. They kept throwing things into the mix to see if it would work. Like, let's do Frankenstein, let's do Jane Eyre, let's do Lovecraft. You know, it's like, just throw it in and see what happens. And I think that they took the Dunwich Horror and they did something fun with it and worked it into the mythology of Dark Shadows. And I thought that's one of the things I really like about Dark Shadows, is that they will pull from these classic horror stories and then reimagine them in their own universe. And I think that's part of why I know you're a big role-playing fan, like Ravenloft. I used to love I used to love Ravenloft, but it was similar to Dark Shadows in that way too. Like, they would take Dracula or Frankenstein or Jekyll and Hyde or whatever and then reimagine it in their own universe, and you'd have these Dark Lords. Each Dark Lord had their own domain, and they were kind of reflective of these classic horror archetypes in that world, that gothic world of Ravenloft. Yeah, that was
Yeah, anytime I can work monsters into my gaming, I'm there. And so the Ravenloft stuff. Steve Sullivan's been on the show a lot, and he was one of the co-creators of the Chill role-playing games. So you get all sorts of horror stuff you can do with that. And
I've been corresponding with. He reached out to me because of the Dark Shadows podcast. He was like, "Oh, I've been listening to your podcast, Buzz." So you commented on it. So I've been messaging back and forth with. He's going to come on the show at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. To talk about Quentin's ghost storyline. Because that was when he first started watching the show, was the Quentin's ghost storyline. I think that was the first one he watched. So that's the one we're going to discuss when he comes on.
Right on. So you brought up the podcast. Here, let's see. Your podcast, or you're kind of giving me some segues here. It's called Terror at Collinwood.
Yes.
And it's been going now for a few months. And you can find it at terroratcollinwood.com. But just Google it and you'll be able to find it. And it is just awesome. I know you reached out to me when you were first getting started with it, and I loved what I heard even before the official launch, and it's just gotten better and better.
Thank you.
And I'm not just saying that because you invited me to be on the show once. I had to turn it down because I was too busy. But
we're good. I would love to have you on. Well, thank you for all,
definitely.
And thank you for all the advice too, because you gave me a lot of useful advice. Because I was like, how do I make a podcast? I have never done this before, so I kept messaging you, and I appreciate the feedback. And I just had Dominique on, and Dominique Lamses, who I heard on Monster Kid Radio, and I was like, oh, Dominique's like a huge Dark Shadows fan. I have to have her on too. So she was great.
I hope I'm not talking out of turn and kind of outing her a little bit. When you reached out to her, she geeked out to me and a couple of people like, oh, I get to be on the show. It's like, so yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, she was.
I mean, she kept it cool, but I know she was excited.
She was sensational. She was just great, wonderful. Yeah.
She's one of my favorite people. So to have her on your show was just super cool.
Oh, we had a blast. Yeah.
Oh man. How long? It's only been going for a few months now. But I definitely feel like it's something that has legs for sure. It's there's so much you can do. So much you can do with Dark Shadows, and with what you're doing, the way you're kind of picking the different storylines and all that. You're not doing like an episode by episode breakdown.
No.
Whatever. You're picking up the bigger storylines and kind of diving into the themes behind all those. And I love that approach because there's so much to do with Dark Shadows.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because you can always come back around and dive into subplots and characters and things like that. I did have a couple of friends who wanted me to do an episode by episode podcast, but I said, look, there are 1,225 episodes of Dark Shadows. Even if I did this as a weekly podcast, which I don't plan to do in the long run, it would take me over 23 years to cover every single episode of Dark Shadows. So like, as much as I would love to do that, I may pick specific episodes and devote a podcast episode to discussing that episode. But the whole shebang, I think it's just the way to approach it, I think, is just talk the storyline. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun doing that. And Terror at Collinwood was actually one of Dan Curtis's names that he was thinking about using for Dark Shadows when they were considering names for the show. Shadows on the Wall and the House on Widow's Hill. One of the names he was considering was Terror at Collinwood, and that's actually where that name came from. It just seemed like a good name for a podcast about Dark Shadows,
And which is something that I learned through your show. I had no idea that was one of the potential titles. So you're going to learn something if you haven't listened to the show yet. There's another reason not to just to geek out about Dark Shadows, but actually learn a few things about the production as well. How do you pick which storyline or which story you're going to cover on the show?
I'm just going in order. I started with the first one with the Burke Devlin's revenge and Vicky's search for her parents, and then Laura the Phoenix, and then introduction of Barnabas. And each storyline, I bring somebody on who's passionate about that storyline or the characters, some of the characters in that storyline, and give them the opportunity to share their views and insights on that storyline. And I think that's part of the fun, is having different people come in and kind of geek out with me. It's just an excuse for me to like geek out with people because none of my friends really watch Dark Shadows, although I'm trying to convince them to. So like, oh, this is a great opportunity to geek out with many people about Dark Shadows. Yeah, I just kind of go in order, and then I'm peppering in other topics as well as I go through this. Like I have an upcoming episode this week with Tom Diamond from the Literary License podcast, and he's a big Thayer David fan, as everyone should be.
Nice. Oh, he's phenomenal.
Oh, he totally is. He's wonderful. What a wonderful actor, And so we did the characters of Thayer David and just talked about each of the characters he played in Dark Shadows, which because he played more characters than any other actor in the show. We had fun kind of talking about him. So I like peppering in other topics as we go along, in addition to just talking about the storyline itself. And I'm going to have people from that's a question I get pretty regularly is, are you going to have anybody, actors from the show? Eventually I plan to. I want to get over the butterflies, and get my sea legs. But I actually have been talking to one of the production people from the show randomly. Is so strange. He reached out to me about Shilling Shockers, about the horror host show, because he now runs a TV station down in New Jersey. And I was like, wait a minute, are you from Dark Shadows? Because I recognized the name from he's like, yeah, I'm semi-retired and I run this TV station now down here. And I'm like, oh my God, can you be on my podcast?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was Nick Bessing. He was one of the video engineers on the show, a video and tech guy on the show. I was like, oh my God, I recognized his name. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This can't be the same person. So I asked him, I said, are you the Nick Bessing from Dark Shadows, who was like the video engineer on Dark Shadows? He's like, yeah, I worked on the old Dark Shadows TV show. I was like, what? No way. He's like, yeah, I'm semi-retired. I run the station in New Jersey now, like a local, access station down there. I was like, what? I literally just started a Dark Shadows podcast. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's just fun to geek out. And I really wanted to do it from like a Monster Kid perspective, because, Dark Shadows came out, like I said, came out at that time during the monster boom, during the monster craze. And I think a lot of monster kids love Dark Shadows a lot. But I've also encountered sort of like, oh, it was a soap opera, so doesn't register for some people, like, oh, I don't watch soap operas. But it's like Dark Shadows really wasn't a soap opera. It was in the sense that it was a serialized narrative, certainly, but it was its own thing. Like Dan Curtis pitched that as a primetime show. He came in, he wanted to do it, and they gave him a soap opera, and he's like, okay, he used that format to do what he wanted with the show, right? And eventually it became this monster mash, with all these supernatural storylines. So I think in the sense, yes, it is a serialized narrative story, and you do have romance in there. There is gothic romance in there too, but it's definitely its own animal, I think. I'm always kind of disappointed when people are like, oh, it's too much of a soap opera for me. I'm like, what does that mean? Like all TV shows now, all genre shows now are pretty much soap operas, right? Even non-genre shows like Breaking Bad and stuff like that was all serialized narrative, Game of Thrones and things like that,
From the very beginning of Dark Shadows, there might not be that overt supernatural influence, but it's still gothic. It bleeds gothic.
Oh yeah,
it's seeping from the screen.
Yeah,
and then you start to get into some of the spooky with the ghosts and all that. And then the one storyline that I had to turn down being shown about the Phoenix storyline is just amazing.
Yeah.
I love that storyline so much, and just. With the seance they were trying to do so good.
With Dr. Guthrie,
I love Dr. Guthrie. I was so disappointed with what happened to Dr. Guthrie.
I know. That actor is still alive too, John Lasseter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think he's in his 90s, but he's still alive. But he doesn't really talk about Dark Shadows. I don't think he remembers too much of it. He was on for a short time, But that was such a weird, unique storyline with the Phoenix. Like to take a mythological phoenix, that bird, and kind of turn it into this supernatural humanoid being that kind of is reborn in the flames, and played by Diana Malay, who was so ethereal herself and had this eccentric, strange, otherworldly quality about her. It was such a cool storyline and really weird and different.
It's not something I expected. Again, like I said, I came to this kind of late in the game, and I was hooked from the beginning. And then when this supernatural stuff started happening, of all the things to throw into a supernatural scary show, a phoenix?
Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah, it really does.
He gets this kind of a very dangerous kind of element to the whole thing, and I've never even considered. But yeah, It worked so well.
Yeah, definitely. And it also like set the stage for Barnabas too. Like she was the first supernatural antagonist in the show, the first supernatural villain in the show, and sort of set the stage with the underpinnings to bring in Barnabas as well. And it's cool that they went for something so strange and different first before even thinking to bring in a vampire. They did it. A phoenix. Like, who would think to do that? It's such a weird idea, with the painting and everything, with David and the flames and stuff. And then they bring her back later, of course, and she returns later on. And it's a good character for that because she's just a cyclical being who
she's
comes
a phoenix.
in. She's a phoenix, so she can keep coming back. Of course, in Dark Shadows, everybody comes back. Like death.
Yeah.
Death is just like hitting the pause button on Dark Shadows. It's like you're going to come back as a ghost or whatever, or a zombie or another character,
Yeah, except for Burke Devlin. I always want to Burke.
Yeah.
And I know Dominique and I disagree about Burke. She cannot stand him.
Yeah,
and I think he's kind of a creep, but he's a fun creep.
Yeah. Well,
I think he's a good character.
Mitch Ryan was great actor to play that. He played that role very well. Anthony George, I felt bad for him. Like those were big shoes to fill, and he wasn't as good as Mitch Ryan in that role. But I thought he was very good as Jeremiah. He was a much better Jeremiah, I thought. But Burke, I don't know if you've heard. Big Finish does these audio plays, these Dark Shadows audio plays, and they did one where Burke comes back, and they got Mitch Ryan. They got Mitchell Ryan and Catherine Lee Scott to do one of those audio plays, and I don't consider those canon. They're just like they exist in their own universe in my mind, but it was really cool to hear Mitchell Ryan come back and play Burke again. It was called And Red All Over, the audio play, and it takes place many years later, and it's what happened. At first you're not sure, like, who is this character? He sounds like Burke, he looks like Burke supposedly, but he died in a plane crash, so what the heck happened? So it's an interesting story, at least, and just really cool to hear Catherine Lee Scott, Maggie Evans, and Burke Devlin having scenes together again after all those years.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So how did you first stumble across Dark Shadows?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I don't ever remember a time when I didn't know what Dark Shadows was because of my uncle Valdemar, who I talked about in the first episode. He's not Waldemar. He does look a little like Valdemar Daninsky. He looks a little like Paul Naschy. There's a little bit of a resemblance there. I'm like, wow, I'll never seen him during a full moon. Now that I think about it. But Uncle Valdemar, and downstairs from Uncle Valdemar lived, of course, my Aunt Agatha. So I was like, I was destined to be a horror host. I have an Uncle Valdemar and Agatha. This is the world I lived in. So my uncle was a huge monster kid in the 60s. Like, he was a kid in the 60s. My family moved here from Portugal, from the Azorian island of São Miguel, São Miguel, and then they lived in Terceira, which was one of the Azorian islands off the coast of Portugal, and they moved here in the 60s. So Uncle Val was a kid at that time. He immediately discovered American pop culture on television. He started watching the George Reeves Superman. He got into all that stuff, like Lost in Space and Batman later on, all that stuff, and horror, especially the horror stuff. Like, he was watching Monsters, Addams Family, and Dark Shadows. And he would go, there was a theater here, the Capitol Theater. He'd go see Hammer movies at the Capitol Theater.
Oh, wow.
They would show Hammer movies and stuff. Like, he grew up loving that stuff. He'd get the famous Monsters of Filmland magazines, collect bubblegum cards. He had his own set of fangs. I remember he had those Pickwick horror records, horror sound effects and things like that. And he would try to scare me with that stuff. He loved trying to, like, scare me. But I was actually, he loved it. Oh, he said this.
Oh, it was meant to be then.
Oh gosh. I just remember, like, when he probably scarred me for life, but I was little, and I remember one night, it was getting dark, it was dusk, and you hear outside the window, and then there's a knock on the door, and my mom opens the door, and there's Uncle Val dressed head to toe as a vampire. I was like freaked out, like he just wanted to scare me, but anyway, he started giving me that stuff, like, as he was getting into, like, late teens, early 20s. And he started giving me, when I was little, his famous Monsters magazines. I remember him giving me the, like, Karloff as the Mummy the Basil Gogos painting on the cover. He gave me,
Oh, wow.
and the Barnabas one. I remember he gave me the Barnabas one with the Barnabas painting on the cover, and bubblegum cards. He started giving me his horror records. He gave me Book of Poe stories. He just started giving me all that stuff, and he would tell me about these movies and shows. He would tell me about Dark Shadows. He would tell me like who Barnabas was and the stories of Dark Shadows. He would talk to me about that stuff, like, oh, and then Quentin, and he turns into a werewolf, and Angelique is a witch. She made Barnabas a vampire, and he would tell me about it, but it wasn't on TV when I was really little. But I guess as I started getting older, like going into 82, like 8, 9 years old, Uncle Val was the first person I knew who got a VCR at that time in the early 80s, right? And it was like one of those big clunky numbers, that the top loading VCR with the RCA, and it was I remember they were like pretty expensive back then too. But he had a VCR, and he immediately started getting copies of horror movies from friends of his who would make him copies. So he lived with my grandmother, and we'd go visit, and he'd say, "Oh, I got the Wolfman. You want to watch it?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course I want to watch it." So I'd sit down, watch the Wolfman with him, watch the Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula. I watched all the Universal movies with him. He started getting all that stuff, like the Vincent Price, Corman Poe cycle. He'd get those films like House of Usher and stuff, and Mask of the Red Death. I mean, probably shouldn't have been watching this stuff when I was a little kid, like Hammer movies. Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. I remember being totally freaked out by that, but it was so awesome and great, like with the bakery and Veronica Carlson and Christopher Lee Biden. Oh my God. But then at around that time as well, he started getting these bootleg syndicated copies of Dark Shadows. They were airing in syndication in other parts of the country, and he met this guy Mark, who was also a fan, and Mark got him like these like 4th generation Dark Shadows tapes. And I remember going over, and he said, I got Dark Shadows, and my mom was excited too, because she used to watch it with him when she was a teenager. So he put in the tape, and I remember very distinctly that hand. It was the first episode with Barnabas where Willie releases Barnabas. And I just remember Willie opening that coffin, and that eerie hand with the black ring slowly reaching out and grabbing him by the throat, and the absolute terror on John Carlin's face. Oh my God, Derek. I was like hooked so hard. Like I was like terrified. I became obsessed with. I needed to watch more of them. I needed to see what happened next. And it just became like this thing where I just would go over to visit. I'd want to go over to watch Dark Shadows, and I would have awful nightmares about Barnabas Collins, terrible dreams about Barnabas, sometimes just scenes from the show where he has Maggie Evans locked up, and he had me locked up, or with David when he was wanted to kill poor David. It's like, David was a jerk, but wow, to be killed by a vampire, like to have a vampire after you was pretty terrifying. So I'd have all these terrible dreams. But I loved watching it. And then the tapes ran out somewhere in the 1795 storyline. And I was like, oh no, what happened? How did Vicky get back to the present? Like I was so sucked in. And then a little bit of time went by, and he found out my uncle at Channel 58 out of Vineyard Haven here in Massachusetts was a UHF channel that was also airing Dark Shadows in syndication. So he actually got a roof antenna. He already had cable, but he got a roof antenna to switch back and forth just specifically to watch Dark Shadows. So we would watch it and tape it, when it was on. And Channel 58, I think by the time he got the antenna, it was already in the Adam storyline, the Frankenstein story.
Okay,
Yep. So, and they ran it all the way. They ran it all the way up into about halfway through parallel time, 1970 parallel time, which was the entire syndication package up to that point, because Dark Shadows at that time in the 80s and going into the 90s when it would air in syndication, the last year of the show and the first year of the show were not available in syndication, or they were like extremely expensive and stations wouldn't pay for the last year of the show. So it ended like in that 1970 parallel time storyline where they were doing like Rebecca and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then it ended. So I was like, oh, it ended again. I want to find out more. But luckily, like a couple of years later, the MPI tapes started coming out, and I had like a part-time job at my uncle's clothes store on weekends. Another uncle of mine, I would spend all my money on Dark Shadows merch, on tapes and fanzines. Like I got into the fandom at that time as well. Yeah, it just all fed together. Like it was like all part of that love of that classic horror stuff. And I love gothic horror, like all of that stuff. He kind of fostered that interest in me and in all kinds of cool stuff like rock and roll, like 50s and 60s rock and roll and superheroes and things like that. He liked all, and still to this day enjoys that stuff. So he kind of passed that on to me, which I'm always grateful for, like it sounds kind of lame, but to say that, or geeky to say that, but like a lot of the stuff I like when I think back about it, it's like because Uncle Val introduced me to all that stuff,
I hear stories like this and I get so jealous because I didn't have anybody like that growing up. So to have somebody like that, an older, family member or mentor figure or whatever, to introduce you to this wonderful fandom and hobby and obsession, it just sounds amazing. And that's one of the things that I try to do with like Monster Kid Radio and the different appearances that I do or whatever, is that I want to be introducing people to this love and get them hooked. And that's, and I feel like horror hosts do that, and the scholars and the writers do that, and the podcasters do that. And I think it's important to share that love, to keep this stuff going.
Yeah.
And especially something like Dark Shadows, which, like you said, somebody, the non-initiates, like, oh, it's just a soap opera from the 60s. Well, it is, but it's so much more. And here, let me show you why.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I like about your show, is that you never talk down to anybody about it. You're just like, hey, let's enjoy the fun and geek out together about Dark Shadows.
Yeah. Thank you. And what you're doing is with Monster Kid Radio, is just such an important thing, to perpetuate this. I heard on another podcast. It was unreal. It was actually a He-Man podcast, Masters of the Universe podcast, and they were talking about, they're like, oh, all these podcasts now, they never talk about the old horror movies like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm like, those are the old horror movie, the classic horror.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
so it's like this is perpetuating that love, because what you're doing is from pure love for this stuff,
right.
and passion for it, and putting that out into the world is so important, because it brings in even people who are already fans. It just jazzes them up even more, and it also passes it on to new people who might want to check it out. Oh, like, what's this about? A monster podcast, because this stuff is iconic for a reason, right? It's classic for a reason, and I love that you're celebrating it with Monster Kid Radio and keeping it going.
And listeners just found out why I wanted to have Penny on the show. No, I do it because I love it. And if I can bring more people along for the ride, that's great. And you're building the community. And I'm hoping people will listen to Tara at Collinwood and get that same, I feel like they will get that same kind of, wow, this is something cool that I want to learn more about and be part of. And you're already on your way to developing what I think is going to be an awesome long-running podcast. And I'm a big fan already. And not just because of the podcast, but because you've managed to bring in so many different interesting people and voices, and the artwork that you've gotten on the website. And I want to talk about that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Eric. Yeah.
Oh, Eric has done some amazing stuff here. It's Eric Marshall.
Yeah.
He designed your logo.
Yeah.
Which looks like an amazing wood print kind of artwork, which I would love to own, like a wood print of that.
Oh,
that
my
just
God.
Seems cool. So listeners, check that out. And again, link in the show notes, of course, but check out the artwork. But the cool thing, you launched a blog.
Yeah.
What if Dark Shadows had a cartoon in the 1970s? Oh, wow.
Imagine if that had happened. Because Star Trek got a cartoon, so why can't Dark Shadows have a cartoon? Dang it.
And I love the Star Trek cartoon, but man, I would love the Dark Shadows cartoon.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, Eric is prodigiously talented. Eric Marshall is a brilliant writer and artist, and I know Eric. We both have worked on the Masters of the Universe brand as writers for the toy packaging. We got a gig in 2016 writing bios for the characters, and in fact I introduced a vampire character into the He-Man lore, which was my one thing that I'm like, yes, I introduced a vampire into He-Man. I don't know if that character will ever see the light of night, I guess, again. But
it's the Crimson Countess, is that right?
Crimson Countess, yes.
Yes.
And Eric and so Eric and I worked on those bios for a while. We worked on a couple of books for Dark Horse too. And Eric, I've known Eric he did a lot of fan art over the years in the Masters of the Universe forums, but he's a fan of all kinds of stuff, like anything horror, sci-fi, fantasy. Eric tends to be a fan of, and he used to do an article for a magazine called Serial Geek, where he would take 80s movies and reimagine them as cartoons. Like, what if the Goonies had a cartoon in the 80s? And he would do like an 80s cartoon mock-up of the Goonies, for example. So he's been watching Dark Shadows. He was in episode 2 of Terror at Collinwood. He had watched it here and there over the years, but this is his first like full watch through of the show. So he's getting of course sucked into it. So I said, you did those articles in Serial Geek. What if you did Dark Shadows as a cartoon, but as a like cartoon after Dark Shadows went off the air, like with Star Trek? Like, what if Dan Curtis had pitched Dark Shadows as a Saturday morning cartoon after the show went off the air? So he came up with this amazing Hanna-Barbera model sheet that he sent me of Barnabas. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. This looks just like what Hanna-Barbera would have done back then. Like he's a big fan of Alex Toth, of course, Space Ghost. So he did it in Alex Toth inspired style. And he even put like aging around the edges of the model sheet. I mean, he's just so brilliant. And then he just started drawing the characters as he went through. He's like, oh, here's Quentin, here's Angelique, here's Adam with Professor Stokes. He would just start sending me, or here's Vicky and Burke, like he would just start, which by the way, wouldn't Mitch Ryan have been a great Bruce Wayne? Like when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, he looks just like Bruce Wayne from Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah.
And I thought about it. I was like, oh, live action Mitch Ryan from the 60s probably would have been a good Batman, the Dark Knight Batman.
Wow.
Yes. Because he has the chin, like, oh, you'd look good. Somebody do a Photoshop of Mitch Ryan as Batman. So he started sending me these model sheets, and then he did Collinwood. I mean, just so many great characters, and he's doing more too. So I wrote up this article, and my initial plan was to do it as kind of a pretend it was real, like lost model sheets from the Hanna-Barbera, cartoon that Dan Curtis pitched to compete with Filmation's Star Trek cartoon. But then I was talking to Ansel Faraj, who's been on your podcast as well, and Ansel was like, that might not be such a great idea because people might believe it's true. And I agreed with him when you mentioned, I was like, yeah, Ansel's right, because I don't want to spread misinformation. So I rewrote the article to just matter-of-factly say, hey, imagine if this was a thing, But we wanted it to be like a serious, like we toyed with the idea of like, what if it was like, should it be like a funny cartoon or for kids, or should it be like spooky? And we both agreed it should be spooky, definitely, like, a little more serious in tone, but still kid friendly, because we were like, oh, maybe we should have a cartoon dog, which would be ridiculous. We were like, nah, maybe not. Because you look at the Whitman did a couple of Dark Shadows puzzles in the 60s, and one of them has Barnabas in a cemetery with this like really creepy looking black dog, like this scary looking black dog standing near Barnabas. I'm like, who the heck? What's that dog? Like,
what would you name the dog? Because it would have like a weird cutesy name too.
It should. We did have a name for it. We were going to call it. This is a total like in joke for like fandom in joke. We were going to call the dog. I was like Rodolfo because so this is like I would have to explain this. Seaview Terrace, the Carey Mansion, which was used for Dark Shadows, the house that was used for Dark Shadows in Newport, Rhode Island, is the owners of the Carey Mansion had, and they might, I don't know if it's still alive, but they had a dog, and the dog, it was like a bull mastiff, and the dog's name was Rodolfo. So somebody did a fan film at the house at Seaview Terrace. They got permission to film at the house, and there's an actor in the fan film who plays both Julia and Barnabas, which is hysterically funny. And the Barnabas, when he's playing Barnabas, he hypnotizes the dog and goes, Rodolfo, listen, come to me, Rodolfo. And they're cutting to the poor dog, and the dog's just like staring like blankly. It was such a ridiculous, in joke. I was like, oh, if we put the dog in, we have to name it Rudolfo. But we didn't. We ultimately decided not to, because we're like, oh no, we wanted to be more in the spirit of the TV show and make it more serious. We have already had one attempt at a comedic Dark Shadows, which I prefer not to remember. But
yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up. Well, obviously, link in the show notes for all of this. I think Eric's artwork is amazing. I am transfixed by his rendering of Angelique.
Oh yeah, he really captured Lara Parker's expression in the eyes. Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
She's great. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. If there was a cartoon and you had a chance to voice one of them, which character would you voice?
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Well, I would want all of the original actors who are still alive to come back and do the voices. But, come on. I clearly defer to Lara Parker. She has to be Angelique. But if she wasn't interested. No, I can't say Angelique. She's too important. I'll say Laura. I would do Laura's voice. I would love to do her voice, or Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson would be fun. Ooh, Elizabeth. Oh, I could do Elizabeth. That would be fun. Oh, that'd be good. That would be a fun one to do. Yeah. Anybody. Give me anybody. I'm just because the lady at the train station who has one line. That's the voice I would do. Dan Curtis was actually floating a Dark Shadows cartoon at one point, like an adult cartoon, like for HBO. It was after the '91 series and before the 2004 pilot that never aired, the WB pilot. It was, I think, in the early 2000s, maybe around 2000. They were toying with the idea of doing a Dark Shadows animated series for HBO, which I think could have been really cool if they had done that, because you could get some of the voice actors from the original series back to do the voices, but you could really go to town with showing like Collinsport, things they couldn't really afford to do in the original show, because they were confined to that studio. But they did have some exterior stuff in the very early episodes, but like a really fully formed, painted backgrounds for Collinsport and stuff, and make it really moody. I think that could have been pretty cool if they had done that.
Yeah. Wow.
Who would you voice? Who would you want to voice in the show?
Oh, me?
Yes.
Oh boy. I'll do the dog. No.
Rodolfo.
Man, because I can't imagine these characters without their original voices.
I know, right? That's the hard thing. That's why I was like, when I said Angelique, I immediately felt like I'm not worthy. I can't do that. But it's like, there's.
I'm looking at the character list and I'm trying. You know what? I think Joe Haskell would be fun.
Ooh, yeah, I could see that. That would be awesome.
And not just because I could imagine, being romantically involved with Maggie Evans. Not just for that reason.
See, I thought you were going to pick Professor Stokes because he's sort of like the Van Helsing of the show, kind of, in a way. I mean, he's the occult expert, so. I could see that.
Tell you what, bring in Dr. Guthrie. I'll be Dr. Guthrie.
Dr. Guthrie. Oh, Dr. Lang, maybe.
Oh, there you go. Oh, man. So we've been chatting for about an hour. I could chat with you for another few hours about all things Dark Shadows, and then maybe talk about some other things. But but I do want to start wrapping up. Is there anything coming up on the show you want listeners to know about?
Oh gosh, well, I'm in the process of moving right now. I'm going to be actually moving this coming Friday, so I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break until I get set up with Wi-Fi in my new apartment and everything. But once I come back, I am going to be back in full force, and I'm going to be having some people from the show itself. I hope to get on the podcast, and lots more spectral guests like Derek. At some point, I want to have Derek on for sure. Talk future storyline. But other than that, that's I'll definitely be back with it down the road.
I know you're in the middle of a move, and we've chatted offline a couple of times, and I know you're about to make a big move, which is really cool, and I'm excited for you for that.
Thanks. Yeah.
But I'm even more excited that the show's going to be coming back too. So,
yeah, it'll be a brief break, just a little brief break, not too long.
Yeah. I totally get it. I'm so excited and I'm so proud of the show and what you've done and interview for this. And I could see this thing running for years. If you are willing, I'll be listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you for helping to inspire the show and for giving me lots of advice on how to do a podcast, because I am not a technical person by any means. Like for the horror host show, it was Rebecca that always did the editing and all of that stuff. So I am not really good with that stuff. So it's definitely been kind of expanding my horizons a little bit to learn how to actually do this stuff, which is good. You know, I think it's good to learn new things as you get older. I think I find I tend to get like into a comfortable place where I'm like, okay, I'm pretty comfortable. I don't need to learn how to do these things. And I think that's when you start to fall out of touch with stuff. And it's like, I want to learn how to do a podcast. So thank you for your advice. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I'll be sending you that consulting bill here in a little bit. So, no, I will not.
You have to let my admin Rodolfo handle that.
You know who to call when you have ghosts. But who do you call when you have monsters?
We're the Monster Squad. What's a squad? It's like Miami Vice, I think.
They're young and inexperienced.
Naughty virgin.
They're a bit disorganized.
Monsters are not real. We don't know that, sir.
2,000-year-old dead guys do not get up and walk away by themselves.
But when strange things start happening in town...
There's a monster in my closet.
Ooh, look at that big, scary monster!
What's happening? You wait till the werewolf.
Silver bullet? They're the only ones ready to do battle.
Something's out there that's killing people. And if it's monsters, nobody's gonna do a thing about it but us.
Soon the creatures of the night shall rule the world.
Real monsters? Us? Midnight. In the world, remember? Maybe we can be like Mass Squad instead, you know. 2 mass bombs.
Yeah, 1035, stick back up! Hurry
Or Nature Squad. The book was right. Don't you think it's all true?
By midnight,
You guys!
they won't seem so young anymore. The Monster Squad.
Wolfman's gone mad.
I can transplant his brain. If I don't, it'll die through lack of oxygen.
In his nightmare mind, one more horror, one last horrendous act. Frankenstein must be destroyed.
For God's sake, go away! Please.
Frankenstein must be destroyed. Peter Cushing, Veronica Carlson. Frankenstein must be destroyed. This picture has been rated M, suggested for mature audiences.
Look, then run for your life. Incredible is the word for the world's first monster musical. See in magnificent Eastman color the daring, dancing, enticing, and horrifying. The incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed-up zombies. From the innocence of music and laughter comes the twilight of terror. Along the midway, scantily clad dancers luring the young lovers into the sideshows.
Shake it, shake.
See the dancing girls of the carnival murdered by the incredible night creatures of the midway.
I really know that something evil lies ahead for me.
An unspeakable pit of dismal subhuman monsters who drool and gibber, moaning for the thrill of revenge. Incredible are the songs, the gaiety, the zombie stomp of those who will stop living. And then the mix-up, trickery, and the device to ruin. See the hunchback of the Midway fight a duel of death with the mixed-up zombies, turning men into monsters, twisted, tormented human vultures, yearning to kill. Incredible creatures clutching at the thin thread with their miserable lives. Human vultures, only the weird zombies remain.
Sure got a shake. Obey.
Who is the woman branded in birth wearing the wart of horror?
Do as Madame Estrella said.
The world's first monster musical. The incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed-up zombies.
Listeners, that brings us to the very end of this episode. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. I appreciate everybody being part of the Monster Kid Radio community. Thank you for sharing posts and retweeting tweets and just letting people know about everything that we do here, because the more Monster Kids, the merrier. You know what I'm saying? Big thanks to Mark and Kenny and Penny Dreadful for their contributions this week as well. Penny, it was amazing to talk with you, and I'm so sorry that I missed out and I had to cancel our upcoming appearance together on your podcast. But you know what, listeners? It's such a great show. You need to check it out. terror@collinwood.com. Again, links in the show notes. And you want to check out at least the drawings, the artwork. What if Dark Shadows had a 1970s cartoon? Oh, that artwork is brilliant. The podcast, even more so. Again, monsterkidradio.net is where you're going to want to go for everything you need to know about Monster Kid Radio. Check it all out there when you get a chance if you want to know more about what we do here. Next week on the show, we have a returning guest. Seb Godin is going to be here next week, and we're going to talk about his upcoming movie project, an upcoming double feature release, and just catch up with him. You know, I love that we've got so many independent filmmakers in the Monster Kid Radio, I don't know what you call it, crew, guest community. You know, just I love talking to independent filmmakers that have a love for this kind of stuff. And Seb's great. He's younger than me, but he's a monster kid through and through. And I can't wait to chat with him and share that conversation with you guys and gals next week. Of course, on Saturday, we've got the Monster Kid Movie Club with Mad Scientists. On Tuesday, we have the Monster Kid Astronomy Club with Harry Houdini. So we have that going on beforehand. Also, we have a TeePublic shop. You can buy t-shirts and merchandise supporting Monster Kid Radio. It's all Monster Kid stuff. A lot of it is the artwork that I use for various episodes of Monster Kid Radio. And lately I've been trying to create some more unique items with like John Agar's head or Peter Cushing's or Blackula's head. I think we've got John Carradine as Dracula up there as well. And I'm hoping, if not today, then by this weekend, we're going to have a Barnabas Collins t-shirt available for sale as well. And you can find that by going to tinyurl.com/MKRT shirt. It's MKR, the letter T, and then shirt. You know what I'm going to say next. Link in the show notes. All right, listeners, once again, thank you for being here. Let's go ahead and get this going out to you guys and gals. But before I go, I want to remind you that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives, 3.0 unported license. Of course, that doesn't apply to the song The Bat. That is copyright 2021, Los Dedos. You can find it on their self-titled EP release, Los Dedos, at losdedos.bandcamp.com. Follow the link in the show notes and let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.